Hello and welcome to our fourth episode of our unofficial SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is August 7th, and together with Robert and Goran, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP on Azure. Today we have a very first interesting setup, I would say. So we'll start with the usual topics, like we want to talk about an SAP Community Call by Thomas Saueressig. We want to quickly talk about an integration roadmap update from Christian Klein. Then we want to talk about Microsoft Ignite, an Azure Active Directory SuccessFactors integration. We'll talk about some hands-on labs, and then we'll talk about high availability. And there we'll first take a look at the blog, and then we'll actually have a special guest today for the very first time. And Ravi, he'll introduce himself later on. We'll talk about also high availability and Azure NetApp Files. So I'm really looking forward to this. And similar like what we started last week, we will close off with a "You Didn't Dare to Ask" section. So welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Good. So let's get started. I think most of you have seen SAP started a really interesting format from my point of view. These are these SAP community calls, and one of the first community calls that happened was one from Thomas Saueressig, and I really like the format. So it's available now as a replay on YouTube, where Thomas talks about SAP's product strategy. He basically starts with an introduction, talks about the intelligence enterprise, all the different things. He also talks a lot about what was announced at Sapphire, but now he really goes into more detail from my point of view. Also, very interesting thing there is that, well, after going through all the slides and basically he presenting, there's roughly half an hour of Q&A, and I thought that was also really interesting, where he really took questions from the community that came in either via the live chat, but also from social media. So I think that was a really interesting format, and I hope that SAP will continue doing this. So for everyone who hasn't watched it, I can definitely recommend spending 30 minutes or an hour, depending whether you want to listen to the whole thing or just the presentation. Take some time and watch the video. I think that was really interesting.
Great.
Good. The other thing that is actually also mentioned by Thomas in his presentation is an update from Christian Klein. So again, I think beginning of the year, he had first talked about the integration roadmap. Obviously, the whole integration topic is top of mind for a lot of customers right now. They have an SAP stack and maybe also obviously non-SAP systems. So how does the integration look like? And I think Christian, when he first released this roadmap, had made some bold statements, and it looks like they are really on track with this. So the goal right now that he mentioned is that they're currently at 50% of integration packages, whatever this exactly means, but they plan to be at 90% by the end of the year. So I think it's good that Christian updates the community on this, that he really shows that this is really important to him. So I think that's a really good move as well. So in his news article here, he talks about that, but obviously there's also a link to the actual integration roadmap or down here. So I think it's really good to see this open communication from SAP.
Yeah, and probably they mean a lot on a sub-cloud platform as an medium to integrate the stuff as well. And integration is always a critical point for any customer. You know, if you don't have it, then you pay a lot and suffer a lot. So any kind of integration, we will see those topics also on the Microsoft side between SAP. It's a kind of crucial.
Yeah, this is true, but customer on the other side asking for more detailed definition of those abstract terminology like integration from SAP into something. Yeah? So I think SAP this is a good step forward, but I think from my perspective, I would like to see a little bit more, more detailed information about what that exactly mean, how to do it, and maybe linked to the best practices, linked to something like that, where I can take over and now try to implement that or try to play with it.
Yeah, I think like you said, Goran, the SAP Cloud platform and there, especially the integration suite, obviously are really, really important. I think SAP is really investing a lot in these integration packages, in these iFlows. And what I also really like is that they're not only talking about SAP to SAP integration, but obviously, for example, here they are talking about a Salesforce integration, and there are templates or iFlows available or open connectors that will help with the integration of these systems. So it's clear that SAP Cloud Platform plays a very, very important role in all of this. And yeah, I'm sure, Robert, we'll see over time more and more actually solutions or scenarios. The SAP Discovery Center, by the way, that we talked about last week as well, has already some nice examples how you can really get started, how you can also use the trial environment of the SAP Cloud Platform to test out some integration scenarios. So, but
on the other side, we are not sleeping. I think our colleague did the great. You want also to present what Roman actually, I think, mentioned, or?
Yeah, sure. We can jump ahead. Exactly. So Roman Broich, I guess some of you already know him. Has created quite a few really beautiful tutorials, and the last one that he published is a hands-on lab on combining Microsoft Graph. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com, then the SAP Graph, there's also the link, beta.graph.sap, together with Microsoft Teams and the Azure bot. So if you scroll down here, there is the scenario. So you have an agent. It's basically a call agent scenario. The agent uses Microsoft Teams, and he can interact then with a bot service, with the Azure bot services. And from the bot services, they can access information from the SAP Graph. They can get information from the Microsoft Graph, and then also send an adaptive card. So really this interactive email to an end user or to the customer. So it's a beautiful scenario. I have to admit, I have not yet tested it. So I didn't yet have the time to actually play with it, but knowing Roman, he really has a beautiful step-by-step instruction how to get started. So I'm sure I'll test it out as soon as I find some time to do this. But I think it's like you said, Robert. It's a nice example of bringing SAP data here in this context from the SAP Graph together with the Microsoft side.
Yeah, and single sign-on through the Azure AD seamlessly without any popping up afterwards, what I can see.
And that's actually a beautiful segue to another very important topic that I'm super excited about, and that's the Azure Active Directory and SuccessFactors integration. You might have seen this already being demoed by myself or some others, where we talked about how you can have SuccessFactors integrated in Azure Active Directory, and in a way that typically when a new employee joins a company, obviously all the record is created in SuccessFactors. So all the bank details and whatever, that's there in SuccessFactors. But obviously this information also needs to be available in Azure Active Directory, needs to be available in other systems. And what we have been working on with SAP for quite some time now is to have this user provisioning from SuccessFactors into Azure Active Directory. And we had a public preview everything worked out beautifully, and now we're just able to announce this, that it's general available. So it's basically here's the flow. We already have some customers using this live. The idea is really you have now your SuccessFactors system, a new record is created, and then we can propagate these properties to Azure Active Directory, and obviously from there we can use the SAP Cloud Platform Identity Authentication Services to also have these user informations in the SAP Cloud Platform, or we can use third-party applications that are connected to Azure Active Directory. So I think this is really a beautiful scenario of what the integration, the connectivity between SuccessFactors and Azure Active Directory can provide, and then really enable a lot of additional scenarios with this. So.
But from business perspective, I get it. It's going in SuccessFactors side, but from infrastructure perspective or complete platform perspective, what is now? Let's say, I mean, maybe difficult question, but what is now leading identity management source? Is this Active Directory or still SuccessFactor?
So in this scenario, the user credentials would be created in SuccessFactors. Okay. So the attributes from SuccessFactors are propagated to Azure Active Directory. Yeah. But actually, and this is something that was added, and also with the feedback that we got, now there's also support for write back. Not all functionalities, but for example, if you change your phone number in Azure Active Directory, this information can be written back into SuccessFactors. Okay. And I'm sure now that we have a GA, we'll get additional feedback from customers, and then we can also obviously enhance the integration that we have, so that potentially also other fields and information could be written back from Azure Active Directory to SuccessFactors.
So it looks like integration in both directions, so you don't have to jump and change. If you are change on A, I need to do it on B, or another way around. So it's kind of automatically, if you start in one way, it will propagate on a B, and from B will go to A, which is how it should be actually.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I mean, it's not only about the onboarding of a new user, but if a user then retires or leaves the company or changes roles, then in a lot of companies, the SuccessFactors system is the leading system where all this information is tracked. If the user leaves the company, then you would set the flag in SuccessFactors, and this information would then be propagated to Azure Active Directory. So this user would also lose then access to Office 365 because the user is disabled in Azure Active Directory. So I think it really makes a lot of sense to have this kind of integration. And well, now it's GA, so check it out. Good. Right. Then just yesterday there was another news, and so last week in our podcast I was always mixing up Ignite and Inspire, unfortunately. But so last week we had Inspire, but now we announced that we will have Microsoft Ignite also as a digital event in September. So September 22nd, September 24th. And I personally, I attended Ignite twice, I think. At both times it was a really great event. So I'm looking forward to the digital event now. There's actually a nice marketing video, if you like, that talks about the digital experience that we have now with all of our events. But I think it's it's really
maybe a little bit about Ignite. Ignite is for our IT professionals, like we have a build-in in May for development professionals. So Ignite is more for IT professionals, and like what we have in build in May every year. Yeah. So we have these two big conference professionals from IT perspective and from development perspective.
And that's a good point, Robert, because and then Inspire is for the partners. Exactly. And so I got the naming at least mixed up last week, but you're right. The other thing is Ignite will be there will be this first event in September, but then we'll also have a second event early 21. So I think this is definitely something that will be really interesting, and just knowing the previous events, I think it definitely makes sense to register. So registrations will open September 3rd. Just sign up and then enjoy all the sessions there.
Right.
Good. With this, I think we covered all the. There's one last content that I wanted to talk about before we switch over to our special guest, and that is Anjan published a blog on the SAP community that talks about high availability. So obviously all of you that are familiar with an SAP system, you know that there are certain single point of failures. There are certain scenarios where you need to share files. And one option how you can actually create these clusters to also work with high availability and work with multiple SAP environments is if you use SIOS DataKeeper. So Anjan has created a really detailed blog where he talks about how to set up this environment in Azure with different availability zones, how you would set up SIOS and the whole cluster environment. It's a fairly long blog, but the good thing is he really outlines the steps, like what do you need to do to set up the SIOS cluster, what configurations do you need to do. So if you are interested in this, just take a look, work through it. I think it's a really beautiful blog that talks about using SIOS.
SIOS is today on Windows the only way to set up HA on Windows cluster across the zones. Today. Tomorrow it's changing.
Something else.
Something else. So I always remember from Mark Krusinovic, he was having some internal session on future of the cloud, and in the brackets he would say maybe. Maybe. So it's changing all the time, but yes, today this is the only way to set up the HA on Windows in the zones. Yeah.
And as soon as we have other news there, then be sure to join our unofficial SAP on Azure podcast, because then Goran will tell you when these new things happen and are available.
Yeah. So Ravi, warm welcome, a colleague of mine and an engineer and guru here on this topic. He was doing all those engineering, writing the documentation. He knows in and out. So we are really happy to have him as the first guest to break the ice, and his head is still big. He'll survive it, so warm welcome, Ravi.
Welcome, Ravi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Goran. Thank you, Goran.
So the topic is Azure NetApp Files, what we can use, and especially in the HA, how we can. It's always the discussion is from many customers we work, how we can simplify the HA, because HA is a complex thing, and it's always nice to see how the cloud or cloud services can help us to simplify something, or maybe to enable some other scenarios. So Ravi, then back to you.
Sure,
I think we prepare some slides.
Yeah, sure, Goran. I'll just share my slides now.
And maybe you can also quickly
introduce,
talk a little about the background. What are you doing when you're not on the podcast?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I work in the same team as Goran, which is Azure CAT, SAP engineering team. We basically help our customers from the engineering perspective. The customers basically, specifically SAP on Azure, the customers. If they hit any roadblocks, or helping them with design, reviews, and stuff like that.
Cool, great.
So let me start with the presentation. The topic which I'm going to talk about today is high availability for SAP NetWeaver on Azure VMs with NetApp files. So Holger just mentioned about the blog which Anjan wrote. A quick background on that. Basically, we were working with a customer, and we realized that for that particular scenario for the zones availability, making high availability for zones, the SIOS is the only only option, and we don't have a detailed documentation for that. So that was the motivation behind creating that blog for Anjan. Now coming back to this topic, SIOS is one of the options by which we can achieve high availability of SAP NetWeaver shared files. Other option is NetApp Files, right? As we all know, the high availability for SAP NetWeaver Central Services requires a shared storage. So to achieve that on various platforms like SUSE, Windows, or RHEL, for that matter, there are different ways to achieve that, right? For basically for SUSE, we have NFS cluster. So far, we had to build a separate highly available NFS cluster. And for Windows, it was SOFS, scale out file server, or SIOS, as you saw in the blog. And for RHEL, we had an option of BlusterFS. So jumping on to the next slide, basically, this gives an overview. Sorry, there was a question.
No, just
go on.
Sure. So basically, the next slide talks about the overall how Azure NetApp Files help us with the high availability and in the SAP on Azure scenario. So what we are going to talk today is SAP Application Server, which Application Server layer, which includes SAP ASCS. And in the planned box here, as you can see, AnyDB, SAP AnyDB is still planned in the planned stages. And SAP HANA, basically, it is certified to use Azure NetApp Files for N+M scale out scenario. So, but focus of today's discussion would be on the application layer side. Moving on, we'll talk about SLES first. So ASCS on SUSE Linux pacemaker with Azure NetApp Files. So as I just mentioned, to achieve the high availability on SLES for SAP ASCS layer, we needed NFS cluster, for the shared storage, as you can see in this diagram. But Azure NetApp Files simplifies the whole scenario by providing the shared storage in this architecture. So how does it simplify? Basically, you don't need to maintain 2 VMs on high availability, and it simplifies the operational. It simplifies the operational overhead, right? It is highly available native Azure service. You don't need to worry about making it highly available and all that stuff. That you don't need to maintain 2 different VMs, those kind of things, right?
And so it's a 2 VMs patching of the SUSE, knowledge of the Linux, knowledge of the pacemaker, DRBD for the replication. What if something doesn't work? How about the performance, downtime?
Absolutely.
So this is all work, every day-to-day work that admin needs to do it. Right, and here we have just a few clicks and we get a cloud service, so to say, where we offload this part of the work, right? For the SAP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and if you have deployed this NFS cluster and DRBD and those kind of things, you will know how the complexity of it, right? So it's a bit complex, and on the opposite side, if you if we use Azure NetApp Files, it's very simple to set it up and maintain it, manage it, and all that good stuff. Moving on. So this is this is the high-level depiction of what we just spoke. Basically, I mean, in the scenario where we use NFS cluster for the high availability and all that, right, for the ASCS layer. So you need to use two different NFS servers, the pacemaker cluster and all that stuff. How does Azure NetApp Files simplifies? It's the next slide. You see that, I mean, it takes away all that pain and all that maintenance of two different NFS cluster, and you can use the Azure NetApp Files as a highly available shared storage for SAP to achieve the high availability of ASCS layer. This is how the end state architecture of high availability with Azure NetApp Files would look like. I mean, you can see how simplified it is in this slide.
So I can really get rid of a few virtual machines. I don't need to patch them anymore. I don't need to maintain this pacemaker cluster anymore. So this is all really as a service for me. I can really use Azure NetApp Files as a service. I can use NFS there, and I really don't have to care about this anymore. It's just a native Azure service that I can simply consume.
Exactly.
Yeah, and simplify cloning, simplify all those procedures later, like system copy and so on. I mean, it's much more easier to do something like that in this scenario as before. Huh?
Yeah. That's a very good point, Robert. I think it not only takes away the pain of maintaining the clusters, but there are lot more advantages like system copy and stuff like that, right? Snapshotting, those kinds. So, good point. So we spoke about SLES just now from the Linux perspective. From the Windows side, we can just look at this slide. We have detailed documentation on docs.microsoft.com with step-by-step how we will set it up, how you set up the NetApp files, you create volumes and stuff like that, and everything is given step-by-step in the official documentation. So this is how the architecture looks like from the Windows perspective, shared files set up on Windows. As you can see, the shared files, SAP mount, SAP trans, and everything is actually moved to Azure NetApp Files.
So basically, similar story. We don't need scale-out file server, which was a pendant to NFS HA pacemaker cluster. You don't need a cluster knowledge. You don't need storage spaces direct, which is a pendant to DRBD. You just have a cloud service, and instead of you replace 2 or even 3 VMs, which is a recommended setting, so to say, on scale-out file server with a cloud service, so to say, right?
Absolutely. I mean, till this time, till before NetApp Files, we had 2 options: SOFS and SIOS for Windows. On Windows, basically, if you have to set up the highly available ASCS on Windows. But now we have this option, highly simplified, as you saw, low maintenance and easy to.
Yeah. And maybe just to add, I think you didn't put on a Red Hat slides, but basically Red Hat is similar like on SUSE. So they would have this Gluster FS, which is a similar story like NFS HA, and then still you can use ANF as in the same way as a shared file, highly available with SLAs and so on.
Absolutely. So Gluster FS also requires a cluster, and we know like how how complex it is again to maintain a cluster as compared to file share what NetApp provides.
Cool.
So this was it for today.
Great.
So if I want to test it, I can just go to the Azure portal.
Absolutely. You just have to go to the Azure portal, provision the Azure NetApp files, and boom. You select SMB share for Windows and NFS share for Linux, whether Red Hat or SUSE. And the documentation basically is very extensive on docs.microsoft.com, step by step. It walks you through the setting up of NetApp files till to testing it basically.
Ravi, one question. Go on, Holger. Go on.
I just wanted to say, and I think one of the beautiful things there is also that this is really a native first-party service in Azure. So it's really Azure NetApp Files. I mean, it's NetApp. It's powered by NetApp, and obviously we're working very, very closely with NetApp on this. But it's really from an API perspective, from a look and feel in the portal. It feels and behaves like any other Azure service. So I think that's also a huge benefit when it comes to the whole deployment, to the automation, to how I monitor all of this. This is all really embedded in the Azure portal with Azure CLIs, APIs, and stuff like that.
Ravi, one question in direction of Azure NetApp Files. We have different performance tiers. Yeah, so we have the standard, we have premium, or ultra, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is there any recommendation? Is that in that direction? Because I mean, sub-pound share doesn't need to have some big throughput. I think so. We can start with standard, or it's not good to go with that. So, what is recommendation in that direction?
Usually, we select premium there, premium for NetApp files. But I mean, standard can also be chosen.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And trust me, this is setting up is so easy. I have done both sides. Basically, I've done end-to-end setup for high availability on Linux, on SUSE, and on NetApp files. I mean, it's very simple. It's very simplified now.
So 5 clicks, right?
Correct.
Did you count?
Sorry?
4.5.
4.5 clicks. How many clicks?
Yeah.
No, I mean, and this is nice. I would say SAP is, NetWeaver, if we talk, it is a box client server product, which is not, let's say, cloud friendly. So you need to do with the infrastructure as a service. But I like those kind of stuff where you basically piece of functionality you outsource to the cloud service. So this is one example. Another is you use Windows cluster, I don't know, majority as a file share. We also have on Linux SpaceMaker, we have those APIs where you also use the cloud. So this is now how parts of cloud PaaS services are basically taking over, work of typical IT guys, and let's say simplify a life for them. Simplify, make it more robust, more simple, and more simple, it's more stable. It's always like this.
That's the power of cloud.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very, very much, Ravi. I think this was really insightful, very informative. I hope that we can have you back sometime on this show to talk about a few other things. But
I would love to come back.
Cool. Thank you very much. So last week, we started a new section, how we wanted to end our sessions, our You Didn't Dare to Ask session. And Robert, I think you have again prepared something for us.
I need to bring something on this call, because I just noticed, Goran, if you want to have a smile on Holger's face, just put some bold statement against SAP, like, NetWeaver is not friendly and so on. So you see a smile on. Okay, for this time, I prepare something in the direction of high availability. So I want to discuss shortly briefly about SLA and virtual machines, because I have seen this this issue before, with this problem before. The story about single instance, I would like to concentrate about this single instance virtual machine. So we already have plus 3 years, probably more, this single instance virtual machine SLA. So this is going always in combination with premium or ultra disk. So then the customer will get 99.9. What is relatively new is new SLAs 99.5 and 95. If we are using standard SSD disk with virtual machine, then we will get 99.5. And if we are using standard HDD disk, then we'll have 95. And what is sometimes confusing is that if we, for example, combine in the one virtual machine premium disk and ultra disk, we will get this 90.9. But if we combine premium disk, ultra disk in the same virtual machine with standard SSD or standard HD, then we are losing actually this 99.5. We are going more in direction. So if I have this combination and standard SSD, then maximum will get this one. If I have, for example, combination premium disk, ultra disk, or premium disk and the standard HDD, then the maximum I will get 95%. So this is very important to understand how this is calculated. Yeah, and this is just for me from now. I just want to refresh that if someone doesn't know that.
That's really good because I think it really says the OS disk and any connected data disk.
Exactly.
So that's exactly that's a very good point.
Exactly.
Cool. Then I think with this last words from Robert about SLAs and virtual machines, I think that's it for this week. Thank you very much for joining our call, and please subscribe, and we'll talk next week again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.